This is a teardown of the Dell 11-inch Chromebook. 3120 is the model indicator. This Chromebook's used in many schools. It's fairly simple to tear down. All the tools you'll need a number 1 screwdriver, a metal prying tool or metal spudger, a pair of curved tweezers, a plastic spudger, and possibly a T-handle for your screwdriver. First step in tearing down this device is removing the lower case. In the lower case there are 7 screws holding the bottom on. They are number 1 Phillips screws. I'm going to remove all of these. Some of these are a little tight. You may need to use a T-handle on your screwdriver. It'll make it a little bit easier. And then some of these screws may not come out all the way. This is why we are using a set of curved tweezers. I'll try and demonstrate that here in just a moment. They'll stay like this in the device. I use the curved tweezers just to get up underneath the head of the screw and pull it out. One more. Okay. Once you have all 7 screws out, you're ready to use your metal spudger. We use the brand Isessimo. It's just the one that we've used. They're good spring steel. What you're going to do is you're going to take the tip of this Isessimo, you're going to put it in this groove. It goes all the way around the device on 3 sides. And then on the back of the device here, you won't really have to worry about it, but you're going to get it in the groove. You're just going to pry up until you feel a click. What this is there are plastic clips holding the lower case on. They clip to the keyboard bezel. You're just trying to break these clips. You should only have to do 2 sides of this. You will never be able to get the back. I'm sure you can, it's just difficult. Once you have 2 sides, you can get your finger in underneath this and just pull up. And that's how you take off your lower case. Once you remove the lower case, this reveals the internals of the computer. These computers are pretty basic. Here you have your DC jack. It plugs in right here on the board. You have your speakers, and this plugs in here. You have your LCD connector. You have your battery connector and your battery, your keyboard connector, your trackpad connector, your USB daughter board connector along with your USB daughter board, your Wi-Fi card, along with the 2 coaxial antennas. The first thing you do in any electronics repair as soon as you have a chance is you disconnect the battery. This battery can be somewhat difficult to unplug, so I'm going to show you the easy way to do it. What I'd like to do is there are 2 screws at the bottom. These are the mounting screws for the battery. Go ahead and remove those screws. They're number 1 Phillips. Some of these you may need a T-handle for your screwdriver. Some of them are torqued kind of tightly. And in order to disconnect it, just because pulling on these cables is kind of difficult, I lift up the battery once those 2 screws are out and just pull back on the battery, and that disconnects the connector. Once you have the battery out, you're ready to remove the USB daughter board. In order to do this, you need to disconnect the connector from the motherboard. To do this, we're going to use a plastic spudger. We're just going to get up underneath and turn it. This connector will go up at a 90-degree angle. At that point, you can grab either side of this connector and just pull back. This connector is going to be adhered down to the case. It is okay to pull up on this just to release the adhesive. Once you do have that adhesive removed, you're going to take your number 1 Phillips screwdriver, and there are 3 screws, all marked by a white triangle. Go ahead and take all these screws out. That white triangle, you're going to find that on all of your motherboard and daughter boards for the most part. What that means is that that is a mount point. It means it's holding down that piece of board. So go ahead and take out those 3 screws. Once you have the mount, you're going to grab your USB daughter board from the inside of the computer, and you're going to lift up and then pull out at an angle. Once your USB daughter board is removed, you're ready to remove the Wi-Fi card. The Wi-Fi card does have this plastic shield. It's just adhered down, so go ahead and just pull that off. I will not be putting this back in. What this does is it's just a shield for the two coaxial connectors to prevent them from coming up in the future. Once you have that shield removed, you can grab the coaxial connectors and pull up. These will come up very easily. Move those out of the way. And then you have one number 1 screwdriver holding this wireless card down. So you're just going to take that out. Once that screw is out, the wireless card will actually come up at an angle. You can grab it from either side and pull directly out. And that is how you take out your Wi-Fi card. Once you have your Wi-Fi card out, you're ready to start disconnecting all of the connectors on the board. Again, you have a trackpad connector you're going to be using your spudger to do, just like your USB daughter board. Get it under the white portion, come up at a 90-degree angle. Your keyboard connector, same thing. Your speaker connector, just pull back on it. Try not to pull on the cords because you can damage it. I take my fingernails and get it on either side and pull back. Your DC jack, just pull back on that. And your LCD connector. This one's kind of special. You're going to have to get underneath this adhesive and pull up. This adhesive is connected to a metal tab. That metal tab needs to go behind the connector, and then you can pull back on the metal tab. And there are all your connectors. To remove the motherboard, there are 9 screws, all indicated by triangles, just like the USB daughter board. We're going to go ahead and take all those out. These are number 1 screws, Phillips. They should be fairly easy to take out. Again, if you do struggle with any of these screws, use a T-handle screwdriver and apply pressure to the screw. That way you don't end up stripping a screw. One important thing to do in these repairs is to always be organized in your screw placement. So when you're taking a screw out of the device, make sure you put it on some sort of magnetic mat in the shape and order that you took it out. So there are 9 screws in a grid pattern here. I'm putting them on my mat in a grid pattern. Once you have those 9 screws out, you're ready to lift up on the interior of the motherboard at an angle and then just pull towards the center, and that is how you take your motherboard out. And we're going to leave this on the ESD mat. If you do put it on a static charged surface, this can short out, so we're going to keep it on a grounded surface. Once you have your motherboard out, you're ready to remove your DC jack. This is fairly simple as it's only held in by 1 screw. There's no adhesive underneath it. Once you take out that 1 screw, you're ready to just lift up on the DC jack and put it on your mat. Once you have all the internals except for the speakers out of the keyboard bezel, you're ready to remove the hinges. The speakers can come out. All you have to do is lift up on them. We're just leaving them in for ease. So to take out the hinges, you have screws here, 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 and here. And if you look on these mounts, there are triangles pointing to them, stating that they are mount screws. These are number 1 Phillips. Again, you may need your T-handle because some of these are somewhat tight. Go ahead and remove all 4 screws. Once you have these screws out, you're ready to actually break the LCD assembly off of the keyboard bezel. And to do this, what you're going to do, lift up the device and go ahead and open it to about a 90-degree angle. And it will just pop apart. So we're done with the keyboard bezel. And we're going to be moving on to the LCD. Once you have your LCD assembly separated from the computer, you're ready to take off the LCD bezel. This is this plastic protective bezel just outside the LCD. There are 2 screws hidden underneath covers in the corners. What we're going to do, I use a razor blade. You want to get underneath this plastic cover. A razor blade makes it easier just because the edge of it is very thin. And these are very hard to get under with anything thicker than a razor blade. I can do it with the isosimos. Like I said, you will mar the plastic. It's just not good for it. So I'd recommend using a razor blade. Once your covers are off, you're ready to use your number 1 screwdriver. Again, number 1 Phillips. If these screws are tight, make sure you use a T-handle screw. Remove the 2 screws. Once the 2 screws are out, you're ready to move on to your isosimo or your metal spudger. And this is a lot like taking off the lower case of the computer. There's a seam all the way around the edges of the computer, or the LCD bezel. You're going to put your isosimo down in the seam and pry up slightly. Once you have a couple broken loose, you can actually get your finger into this crease and just pull up, and it will break the rest of the clips loose all the way around. You only really have to break 1 clip with the isosimo. And there's the removal of your LCD bezel. Once you have your LCD bezel off of your LCD assembly, we're ready to take out the LCD. This is held in by 4 black screws in the corners. These are number 1s, just like the rest of the screws in this computer. Again, if you have any issues taking out these screws, make sure you use a T-handle screwdriver and apply pressure. Don't want to strip screws. Once those 4 screws are out, you're actually ready to grab the top end of the LCD and lift up. You actually just flop it all the way over. And that's how you take the LCD out of the upper clamp. And then you have this same adhesive tape that you had on the motherboard holding the LCD connector down. What I do is I take my metal spudger and I just push underneath the LCD until I get enough to where I can grab it with a finger and pull back. And again, if you look at this, there's a metal bar right here. This bar will actually clip around the back side of the connector, preventing the LCD connector to come out. So we're going to unclip it, bring it to the back, and draw back and take the connector out. That is how the LCD comes out. Now, one thing about this, we're not going to take this teardown any further, just for the sole fact that you have Wi-Fi antennas. So you have your 2 coaxial cables. The white one goes up the right side of the computer. The black one goes up the left side of the computer. If these are routed wrong and they end up grounding out to this hinge, you will actually melt a hole in the plastic back here, and it can be a fire hazard. So I would not recommend tearing this down any farther than this unless you have to. This is a reassembly of the Dell 11-inch Chromebook 3120 indicator. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Start with reattaching the LCD to the LCD cover. So to start, you're going to take the connector that came out of the LCD earlier. You're going to just slide that in. Try and keep it as level as you can, as these are fragile connectors. You do not want to break them, otherwise you're replacing them. And like I said, they will break very easily, so be very careful with this step. Okay, and once you have it in, you're going to take this metal cage and wrap it around the back side of the connector and clip it into the back side, and then put your adhesive back down. Once all of that is done, you're ready to flip the LCD back onto the upper clamp. Make sure that your cable stays underneath the hooks down here. Get those back in place. And then you're going to put in your 4 screws in the corners from, I think, box 9 on your magnet mat. That is how you reinstall the LCD into the upper clamp. Once you have your LCD properly installed into your upper clamp, you're ready to put back on your LCD bezel. In order to do this, you're just going to lay the LCD bezel roughly into the position that it goes to on the upper clamp, and then you're going to line it up the rest of the way and push down. You can hear these clicks. What we're doing is we are reactivating the plastic clips that hold this bezel down to the upper clamp. Make sure you don't pinch your cables down here in the hinge assembly. all the way around. How you know if you missed a clip, because you can, is there will be a gap on the interior of the LCD bezel. You'll barely be able to see it on top of the LCD, so just pay attention for those gaps. Once you have it clipped back into place, we're ready to put the 2 screws back in the corners. They're both number 1s. They're in box 8 on your mat. Get those both back in place. Once you have them in place, you're ready to reinstall your plastic covers. These covers should still have enough adhesive on them to be reinstalled. So just go ahead and put those back in place and make sure they line up in their wells. These can be somewhat hard to take back up off of your mat. What I recommend doing is taking your metal spudger, just because it's super thin, lay it flat, and slide it underneath the cover. That'll come right up onto your SSMO, and then you can reinstall it. And that's how you reinstall your LCD bezel. Once you have your LCD assembly reassembled completely, you're ready to reattach it to your keyboard bezel. In order to do this, what I recommend doing, you have your hinges here. Set them down on your mat and just push down until you have these at a 90-degree angle. You can use the LCD as leverage, like I said, until you get them at a 90-degree angle. What we're going to do now, flip the LCD top down with the hinges going towards the keyboard bezel. Take your keyboard bezel, flip it over. Now you're ready to bring the keyboard bezel up to the LCD and then just wiggle it up and down until you get them lined up with the screw holes. At this point, pinch the hinges with your fingers and then just push down on the hinges until the computer closes. This will make sure everything lines up properly. And then you're ready to put in your 4 hinge screws out of box 7. Remember, the holes in the actual hinges themselves that the screws go into have triangles. There are 3 holes and only 2 screws, so just make sure you're paying attention for those triangles. Alright, once all those screws are in, you have put the LCD assembly back on the keyboard bezel. Once you have your keyboard bezel reattached to your LCD assembly, you're ready to put your motherboard back in the machine. In order to do this, you're going to take the motherboard and put it at an angle, left side higher than the right side, and you're going to line up the headphone jack with the socket that it goes to in the bottom of the machine. From here, I like to push down on the motherboard softly, you don't want to break it, and then just line up this screw hole right here. You'll know that you have seated the motherboard properly when this screw hole actually comes up into the board. This is a locator pin on the board. Don't worry about whether or not you have your connectors underneath the board. It's not going to hurt them. What I do when this happens is I take my plastic spudger, and I just hook behind the connectors and just fish them out. Once you have all your connectors out from under the board, you're ready to put your 9 screws back in the device. So let's go ahead and do that. Remember, these screws are indicated by a white triangle on the board. These are mount screws, so just make sure you're not putting them in any hole that does not have a white triangle. This can damage components on the device. And you just want to take these down to where they stop. You don't want to torque them past that point. You can cause damage to the board if you take them down past that point. Some of these screws can be difficult to put back in because of the factory thread locker that is on the screw. If you do run into this, first off, take the screw out and verify that you are not cross-threading the screw. If you can verify that you're not cross-threading the screw, what I recommend doing is taking a T-handle and putting it on your screwdriver and screwing it down that way. But again, you don't want to take it down too far using that because you can damage the board. Once your 9 screws are in, you're ready to reconnect your connectors, starting with your trackpad. This trackpad connector has a black mark on it. That is going to line up with a white mark on the board. Just close it with your finger. You're just going to push that connector down. Same thing with your keyboard. You're just going to push that in. There are 2 ears that get hooked on plastic pieces on either side. Then you have this white line that's actually going to line up with the clasp itself. And that's how you know you've done that one right. Then you have this push type connector for your speaker assembly. just going to push that back into its socket. And then you have your LCD connector, which is very similar to the LCD connector on the LCD itself. One thing you do need to make note of is right here in the hinge you have a metal post right here and a metal hook right here. So you want your LCD cable to go in front of this post and then underneath this hook. So we have the post here and the hook here. And once you have those in place, you're ready to take your LCD connector, lay it flat on the board, and then just push it into place. Remember, this is a very fragile connector, and if you do damage this, you will have to replace the entire connector. Just be very careful with that. Once you have it seated in the socket, you have this metal cage. You're going to put that on the back side of the connector and push it down till it clicks. This is what prevents it from shifting back and forth and damaging the picture. And then you're just going to re-adhere this piece of tape. And that is how you reinstall your motherboard. Once your motherboard is in place, you're ready to reinstall your DC jack. This is just the power jack for the computer. It's held in with one screw. Ours stayed on the DC jack, so we did not have to remove it. You're just going to set that back in place. Take your number 1 screwdriver and screw this screw back in. So this is firmly seated down in there. Then you're going to take your connector, and let me line that up so you can see it. You're going to push it back into this push type socket. And that is the full installation of that. You're now ready to install your Wi-Fi card, which is this guy right here. In order to do this, what you're going to do, line it up in its socket. This will be at an angle. It's not a very steep angle, but it's an angle. You're just going to push this back in. You'll know it's done because it'll feel firm, and you're just going to let it sit at that upward angle. You're going to take the one screw that held it in place. This will actually clamp it down. So you can now push down on your Wi-Fi card, put your one screw back in place, and that will mount your Wi-Fi card. Now this is probably the most difficult part of this device, putting these coaxial connectors back onto these coaxial pins. What you need to picture here is a 9-volt battery, how it has the 2 different size connectors, a large circle and a small circle. What you're doing is the cable side is a large circle, the board side is a small circle, and the large circle will crimp onto the small circle. This is how this is held in place. The easy way I have found to do this is by using your spudger so that you can see what you're doing. The black will line up the black arrow, by the way. You're going to just line up this circle to the best of your ability and just push down gently. You don't want to push down in a spot where it won't connect because it can damage it. But you'll hear a click once it does go in place. Just keep trying. Like I said, don't force this. Be very gentle. So both of those are clipped back into place. And again on this, it's just like the LCD cable over here. There's a pin and a hook. Just make sure you're in front of the pin and underneath the hook with the cable. And that is the Wi-Fi card installation. Once your Wi-Fi card is in, you're ready to reinstall your USB daughter board. This is very similar to reinstalling the motherboard, as you do need to take it in at an angle, lining up your USB port. Once you have it lined up, right there, you're going to set it down, and then your 2 screws on either end will actually, the mounts will come through the board. And this just helps you to locate it. So these will come up into the board. You have 3 screws that you need to put back in place. I'm going to start with the middle one, just for balance reasons. It'll prevent it from teeter-tottering. I'm going to do the bottom one. And I'm going to do the top one. And a magnetized screwdriver definitely helps with this. Once you have your 3 screws in, you're ready to reattach your connector. You see this black line on here. When you have it firmly installed in place, the black line, once you clip this back down, will line up with your connector. So that is properly installed. And then you do have adhesive under here. Just make sure you rub that down and get that back in place. And that is the installation of your USB daughter board. Once you have all your components installed back into the keyboard bezel, your motherboard, your USB daughter board, your DC jack, and your Wi-Fi card, you're ready to reinstall the battery. We want to wait till last minute on this because applying power to the board and touching the board with metal can short out the device. So that's why we're doing this last. So to reinstall this, you're going to use the top 2 screw holes right here as locator pins. They'll just sit down into these plastic grooves. And then you're going to put your 2 screws back in the bottom of the battery. And then when you're reconnecting the connector of the battery right here, it's a push type connector. It's very similar to the DC jack as well as the speaker assembly jack. So you're just going to line this, try and keep my fingers out of the way for you, back up into its socket, and then just push that back in. And right here you saw a white flash. That means that the battery was reinstalled. Okay. There we go. And that is your battery installation. So the final step in reassembling this device is putting the lower case back on. In order to do this, it's much like the LCD bezel, where you're just going to set it roughly back into its position, and then you're going to push down and clip the clips back in place. There are clips all the way around this. Just make sure you push them down and it is flush. Once you have all those clips back in place, you're ready to put your 7 screws back in the device. It doesn't really matter what order, just make sure they go back in the same hole they came out of. And then just don't tighten these down too far, as a screw can go too far through and actually prevent the keyboard from operating properly. And once you have all the screws back in, you are finished with the repair. At this point, what you want to do, just open up your device and just hit the power button and verify that it comes on. And you're done. That is the reassembly of the Dell Chromebook 11-inch 3120.